Welcome back. My name is Elisa Biagini. I'm a poet, translator, organizer, one of the many people who organize this conference, and also teacher of writing, art history, and literature here at NYU, Florence. And I'm quite happy today to introduce our guest, Vera Geno. She's a sociolinguist and a translator from Hungarian, and she is currently teaching at the University of Florence. Her research focuses mainly on digital communication, gender issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's an extremely prolific writer, and I will only mention the last two books. One was published last year by Longanesi, L'antidoto, 15 comportamenti che avvelenano la nostra vita in rete e come evitarli. I can loosely translate as The Antidote, 15 behaviors that poison our life online and how to avoid them. And the most recent, Grammamanti, immaginare futuri con le parole, just came out recently, what, a month ago or something?
Yeah. 2 weeks.
2 weeks ago, here we go. Grammar Lovers, that's another loose translation. Imagining futures with words. So I'm particularly happy to listen to Vera first and then have a conversation with her and you, because coming from different backgrounds, but we do have the same obsession with words. In a sense, as a poet, I'm obsessed with the precise word, and she's obsessed with how we use the language, right? But we both, I think, and then you'll tell me if I'm wrong, that we both care a lot about the responsibility that comes with words, right? The weight that words have.
Yeah, I guess so.
The political, meaning the history, particularly considering how we can use or cannot use certain words, particularly with our fascist historical background, what's going on now. So I'm very much looking forward to have a conversation on that. But now I leave the floor to you.
Thank you. How much time shall I have? Shall I take for myself? Because, I'm like water. As much as you give me, I take all the possible time. So 40 minutes, that's great. Okay. Yeah, I'll be okay with that. So I'm very happy to be here. It's a bit difficult right now to switch over to English because I have been speaking in Italian the whole morning. I was in another conference, and this is in these days, this is how my life looks, just going around from one place to another to speak about my favorite issues, which are linguistic issues. Anyway, thank you for having me here. I don't know how much you know about the internal structure of Italian, but maybe first and foremost we have to think about how are different languages shaped from the inside, and from this point of view maybe it's particularly interesting for you to think about the differences between English and Italian. Anyway, in Europe we have basically three types of languages. We have totally genderless languages, which are the Finno-Ugric languages of the Finno-Ugric family. And by chance, I speak two of those languages, Finnish and Hungarian. Hungarian from my upbringing and background. My mother is Hungarian. I was born in Hungary. And Finnish because I lived in Finland for 3 years when I was a kid, so I was forced to pick up Finnish because it was either speaking Finnish or being bullied, so it was not a very hard choice. Anyway, it's always good to know a language, even if I don't use Finnish in my everyday life, whereas I use Hungarian all the time because also my father, who is Italian, well, he's from Veneto, so it's debatable if he's really 100% Italian. You know that they are separatists. Anyway, he speaks very well Hungarian because he was a teacher of Finno-Ugristics and Hungarian language and literature at the university here in Florence. So basically everybody in my family is bilingual, trilingual if you take also Veneto dialect in consideration. So even my mother, who is Hungarian, 100% Hungarian, speaks Venetian, I would say, when she gets very angry with the rest of the family. And so we code mix and we code switch all the time. And then came English because, I just moved around when I was studying, and I studied for 1 year in Australia. And it was a very harsh linguistic experience because I had studied RP, okay, received pronunciation, and I got there in Melbourne, and I could not understand the word, and it was really fancy to pick up the Australian English as well. So this is me. Now, back to the genderless languages. Finnish, Hungarian, and Estonian are genderless languages. This means that names as well as pronouns, nouns and pronouns, are both genderless. Not neutral, which means a different thing. If you want to sign this down, we can later discuss the difference between neutral and genderless, because there is a difference, a semantic important difference, especially when we move to speak about human beings. It's different to think about a way of not expressing gender versus a way of expressing neutrality as a third gender. Now, these languages should be very easy to cope with the gender issues, but we can already foresee that it's not that easy to get over gender issues, because in the same language group we have Finnish, and Finland, we know, is very open in the LGBTQAI issues, and we have Hungarian. And you probably know about the situation in Hungary right now. I would not suggest to be queer in Hungary, okay? So most queer people, if they can, they move away abroad from Hungary, because that's how bad is the situation with Orban and everything. Then we have the natural gender languages. And in this group we have English, but we have also the Scandinavian languages like Swedish, Norwegian, and so on. And these languages share the fact that nouns are without gender, as in English, but pronouns are gendered. So in English we have he, she, and then we have it, which of course you know better than me, we don't use for actual people. And so there is this whole thing going on with the singular they. I will be going back to the singular they later on. And then we have the big issue with Romance languages, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and also German, also if it's a bit on its side, because it has neutral, it's a bit different. But all these languages have gendered nouns, as well as gendered pronouns. So every noun has a gender, usually masculine and feminine, and pronouns as well. As you might have noticed, in Italian we don't have a neutral, which was present in Latin, but we lost it. We have some, how do you say, corpses, lexical corpses, then can be dated back to the Latin neutral, like those plural forms in A, like uova, uovo, uova, ginocchio, ginocchia. These were actually neutral back in the days. And also in Florence, we have some fancy street names, like, for example, Via delle Campora. And Campora was a plural, a neutral plural from campus, basically, okay? But we have also Pratora, which is an old way of saying prati, and so on. So this is the situation. We have two kinds of problems in Italian, referring to the gender issues. The first one is more linear. I would say we stay inside the norm of Italian language, which is the use of the feminine nouns, how do you say, nomina agentis, okay? Like assessora, sindaca, and so on. The debate is still very much alive, even if the issue is not new at all. One of the first documents dealing with the question of the use of the feminine in language is Raccomandazioni per un uso non sessista della lingua italiana, recommendations for the use of a non-sexist use of Italian language, of Alma Sabatini, which were published between 1986 and 1987. So, you know, it's something we have been chit-chatting about a lot for decades, for several decades. And one of the things that, Alma Sabatini was commissioned a field work by the government of Italy at the time, and she had to explain whether Italian was or not sexist. And what she states is that Italian per se is not a sexist language. Most languages are not sexist in their construction. They are sexist in the way they are used, okay? So it's not the language, it's the usage of language to be sexist. And what she says, well, our society is androcentric, so it's built around the men. It's made for men, okay, not for women, for men. She also referred to a patriarchal society as well. And so, as the woman is, from a social point of view, a guest in our society, she is also a guest from a linguistic point of view, okay? There is this dominance of the masculine forms in language at the time, and it's still the same, even if some changes have been going on. So what she suggested at the time was that we shall use all these nomina agentis in the feminine form, like sindaca, assessora, sarta, so referring to every kind of job, of position, ministra, and so on. And also she gave other suggestions, so to make more space for the presence of women in language, because that mirrors a bigger presence, a more important presence of women in society. Okay, so she underlined that there is a two-way relationship between the usage of language and the social visibility and presence of women. And so this is, the first chapter of the discussions on gender in Italian. And even if it's 40 years we have been talking and discussing about these issues, it has, in the time, from 1986-7 to now, it has become a political issue as well. So maybe you have noted that usually the left-wing politicians use the feminine nomina agentis, so there might be ministre in the left-wing part of the parliament, and the right-wing usually uses the masculine form, even for women. For example, Giorgia Meloni refers to herself as il Presidente del Consiglio, the male president of the council, okay? Funny thing, the right-wing politicians usually play down the importance of language, so they say that we have more important issues, that this is, a fancy, radical chic, just stupid feminine, superficial feminists are those who deal with linguistic issues. But at the same time, it's interesting to note that the first official document that Giorgia Meloni produced as soon as she got the power, she got elected, was an official statement in which she required to be called using the masculine form. So, what I think as a linguist is, from one point of view, you say that is not important. The important is that women can be, in every position inside the parliament. So what is really important is that I am now the head of the council. But at the same time, I think it's the first time in the history of Italian politics that there is an official statement requiring the proper way of addressing the head of the state, okay, the head of the council. So she asks for being called, in the first version of this official document, she requested to be called il signor Presidente del Consiglio, and then a second statement came out the same day, and I'm not joking, it's all recorded, by the way. The second document stated that il Presidente is enough. Now, it's nice to know that Presidente is one of those epicene nouns that need only the change of the article. So, il Presidente, la Presidente, it's not even, that big deal. It's very easy to use the feminine form in this case. Now, just one more thing about the structure, the way that the feminine forms are formed in Italian. We can divide our nouns in 4 categories. We have the fixed gender nouns, nomi di genere fisso, which you have also in English, which are those that have a masculine and a feminine form that are completely separated as also etymology, like brother and sister, father and mother, or ox and cow. Okay, you have to know that this is a pair. Okay, that this is the masculine form of the one feminine, or vice versa. And we have that in Italian as well, madre, padre, fratello, sorella, and so on. Okay, so purely on morphology, observing morphology, you cannot understand that these two nouns are together as a couple. okay? And these are present in every language. It's a way of expressing the gender, okay? Also in those languages that do not have grammatical gender. So we have them in Hungarian, we have them in Finnish, we have them in every language, mother, father, and things like that. Then we have the common gender nouns, which are those that need only to change the article and all the other elements of the phrase that have to be matched, okay? So, for example, many of these come from present participles, like presidente, insegnante, docente, gerente, amante, and all these are, episenos, as I said before. It's one form for both genders. And it's enough to say la presidente, il presidente, or l'amante è stata molto focosa. L'amante è stato molto focoso, okay? You have to change the participles and things like that. We have other pronouns, nouns that are in this category. Some of them finish in E, like giudice, vigile. In this case, you need to say il giudice, la giudice. Il vigile, la vigile might sound strange because in one phase, when the first female vigile came out of the city police, they were called the vigilessa. But yeah, if you want, then we can go back to this, but usually linguists say that it's preferable to use zero suffix feminine forms, so not use the suffix essa, okay? So it's better to say la vigile than la vigilessa, la sindaca and not la sindachessa. Anyway, then we have the mobile gender languages. The mobile gender, nouns, which are those that have masculine and feminine form, which are separated, and you have to look them up, basically, in the vocabulary. Those like cuoco, cuoca, maestro, maestra, but also ministro, ministra. Also those that have the E in the masculine form and the A in the feminine form, like ingegnere, ingegnera, which is exactly like infermiere, infermiera. Then we have those that are tore, trice, like rettore, rettrice, direttore, direttrice, and we also have those that go tore, tora, or sore, sora. Pastore, pastora, for example, pastora valdese, because there are preachers, Valdesi have female preachers, so it's pastora, but also incisore, incisora, and things like that. And then finally, we have a smaller, strange category, which are pronomi promiscui, nomi promiscui, promiscuous nouns, which only have either the masculine or the feminine form. Some of these are like guardia, vedetta, sentinella, maschera. The maschera is the person who gives you the tickets at the theater, for example. Also, stella del cinema, a movie star. There's no stello, so Leonardo DiCaprio is a stella del cinema as well as, I don't know, anybody, Andy McDowell, I would say, just the first name that popped in my mind. And in this case, the other form, or the masculine and the feminine form, is simply missing. So this is how you can categorize basically the nouns that need a feminine form in use. It's not that difficult. What is really interesting for me is that this division in 4, which is quite easy to understand, is usually not taught in schools. It's just an issue that has not been considered important until very recent times. So most people come out of the scholar system in Italy and they have no familiarity with this, the way the system of the feminine nouns work. And this means that people have strange problems in using the feminine forms, okay? And most people say, oh, this is not important, women have other issues in society and blah, 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 many things that I have already referred to, okay? So, until now, even if the problems are there and the discussion is very heated at the time, right now there is a huge discussion going on because the University of Trento has decided to use the overextended feminine form in their regulations. Okay, so instead of using the overextended masculine, they switched over, and now there are huge protests going on also between linguists, because not everybody likes innovation, apparently, and using the overextended feminine form for somebody is a problem because it goes against tradition. Tradition is to use the overextended masculine, so do not touch tradition because that's always dangerous, okay? What happens then when we move over to the complexity of the human being, which extends much further than masculine and feminine. You might have already seen this very nice figure. This is the genderbread person. You can find it online. It's used in educating society on the complexity of human gender. And you can see that there are 4 dimensions on this genderbread person. Not gingerbread man, gender person. We're trying to be gender neutral. There is identity, attraction, sex, and expression. Of course, the sex, it's anatomical sex. We thought that it's binary until recent times, and then genetics stepped in and explained that what makes up human sex is much more than just the chromosomes. There are 24 or 25, I don't remember, different, markers that mark masculinity and femininity, so it's much more complex than that. And so geneticists tend to speak about human sex nowadays as a spectrum, more than a dimorphic opposition, okay? So it's not men and women. Most people are men and women, but there is a consistent part of the humanity which are not exactly men and women as we have considered so far. There is a very nice article which is very easy to read on Nature in English. It's called Sex Redefined, and I suggest you to read it just to understand more about the issue. And this is purely anatomy. We are speaking about biology here. Not even biology is binary. By the way, somebody said recently that nothing is really binary in nature. I mean, everything is more of a continuum, a spectrum. So it's not a surprise that even human anatomical sex is not binary. But apart from that, we have gender identity. Now, I don't know how much you know about that, but if we read from Simone de Beauvoir to Judith Butler to Paul Preciado, one thing that comes up is that gender identity, which is an answer to the question, what do you feel to be, how do you feel, is mostly or maybe completely unrelated to anatomical sex. So I might have female sex assigned at birth and do not feel a female at all. Okay? So gender identity is really a spectrum, and usually we refer to cisgender people if a person identifies, if a person's gender identity is coherent with the sex assigned at birth. So, for example, I'm a cisgender woman, because I was born a woman and I identify as a woman, and transgender in all the other cases. So if you are non-binary, gender fluid, gender flux, gender queer, there is even a small portion of people who define themselves gender fuck. Sorry for this, but this is the very angry people call them like this. And all these people can be referred as a group as transgender, okay? And then we have another 2 dimensions. We have attraction, which is the answer to the question, who am I attracted to? And usually we divide persons in heterosexual, attracted to the other sex, or homosexual. Now, if you think that even sex is not binary, these 2 definitions are quite old. They are not a good representation of what is going on between human beings. So nowadays I can hear more and more people speaking about androsexuality and gynosexuality. And this means that, or gynosexuality, okay? So I am an androsexual because I am attracted to person who look like more on the male side. Basically, it means that it's not important if we are the same sex or not. That is not relevant anymore. It's just a description of who do I like, okay? And then the final dimension is that of the expression of gender identity, because we have always to keep in mind that in many places in the world, I just can't really be what I feel. For example, in Hungary, I mean, even if I were a transgender person or non-binary person, I would have serious social issues to come out as a non-binary person in Hungary because I might be beaten up or jailed or whatever. So many people just live inside the closet and do not come out as a non-cisgender or non-heterosexual person. So gender expression is something, again, different. Now, what has all this to do with languages? This is, I think, an excerpt that summarizes well what I'm trying to convey here. It's from Guy Deutscher. It's from an article dated 2010. And he says, consider this example. Suppose I say to you in English that I spent yesterday evening with a neighbor. You may well wonder whether my companion was male or female, but I have the right to tell you politely that it's none of your business. Great line. But if we were speaking French or German, and I would say also Italian, I wouldn't have the privilege to equivocate in this way because I would be obliged by the grammar of language to choose between, for the Italian, vicino and vicina. So if I put up the phrase in English, I spent yesterday evening with a neighbor, and I ask my audience, how do you translate this? Most people will say, ho passato la serata di ieri con un vicino. Now, as I am a female, if I tell you that I spent the night with a male neighbor, you have, a mental image of what could have happened yesterday evening. Probably a romantic thing if I spent the evening with a guy. It's very different. I mean, your mental landscape is very different if I say that I spent the evening with a female neighbor. We might have been binge watching Sex and the City, eating popcorn, those things that girls do among them. Or maybe I just came out as a lesbian, okay? I just told you that I like women. So you see that in Italian, I'm sort of forced to give you an extra information about how I spent my evening. What follows is also interesting. These languages compel me to inform you about the sex of my companion, whether or not I feel it is remotely your concern. Now, of course, I can jump over the issue trying to find the circumlocution. I could say, ho passato la serata di ieri con una persona che vive nelle mie vicinanze, with a person who lives next to me. It's okay, but I have to switch to a sort of a slower way of thinking, just to quote Daniel Kahneman. So it's not the first thing that comes in mind for me. This does not mean, of course, that English speakers are unable to understand the differences between evenings spent with male or female neighbors, but it does mean that they do not have to consider the sexes of neighbors, friends, teachers, and a host of other persons each time they come up in a conversation, whereas speakers of some languages are obliged to do so. Okay? So what is the problem in Italian, in French, in German, in Spanish, in Portuguese, and in many other gendered languages? That we are missing a way or not expressing the sex or the gender of the person we are talking about, we are speaking about. We don't have this luxury of omitting this information. And in which case this might be important? First of all, when I speak of somebody unknown, I don't know the gender of the person I'm talking about. In English, I would say, somebody left their umbrella here. I hope they come back for it. In Italian, I go straight for the overextended masculine. Qualcuno ha lasciato qui l'ombrello, and then that qualcuno is Elisa. Oh, è Elisa, okay? But the first instance is I use the overextended masculine because I don't have something that is, specular to somebody with unexpressed gender. The other case is when I'm referring to a mixed multitude of persons, like here. The first form that comes in mind in Italian to me is buonasera a tutti, okay? To everybody but using the masculine. And then, of course, this is has been corrected over the years to buonasera a tutte e tutti, also for chivalry, first the women and then the men, okay? But tutte e tutti, as the gender-bent person reminded us, is not a representation of the complexity of human beings. There might be persons even here that do not define themselves as males or females. And I mean, it's 150% cool for me, okay? I'm just saying that if 2% of the population of the world is gender non-conforming, it means that even in a small audience like this, there might be somebody. And so, buonasera a tutte e tutti, for me, is simply not enough. Okay, I have been looking for an alternative. And then the third case is maybe the most difficult to solve. When I speak directly with a person who is non-binary or gender non-conforming, I cannot say ti vedo bellissimo oggi or ti vedo bellissima oggi, or whatever, because it would be rude. So what does Italian do with this? So I give you a timeline of what happened in the last 20 years. Okay, first click. Between 2005 and 2010, trying to answer to this solicitation, to this question, to this problem, many homemade solutions started to wander around in Italian language, mainly inside LGBTQIA plus communities. So the asterisk, the at sign, the slash, the apostrophe, the X, the Y, and then the U and the schwa. So basically, buonasera a tutte, asterisk, or buonasera a tutte, X, or the only two that have a pronunciation, buonasera a tutto, very Sardinian, and buonasera a tutte, okay, which sounds Neapolitan to many, curre guaio, okay? So, of course, the two that are mostly used even today in the LGBT plus communities are the U and the schwa, because they can be translated also to spoken language. Well, the asterisk is a little bit more difficult because it doesn't have a sound, but there is this very important scholar, studiosa, scientist, Sara Garbagnoli. She works currently in France, and she uses the asterisk to bring attention to the issue. So she says, buonasera a tutt'asterisco. Like she says it out loud like this. And you see, there is it's like a punch in the face from a linguistic point of view. Of course, you cannot carry it over in a longer conversation. If you say asterisco all the time, it becomes a little bit difficult to sustain. Yeah. And then in 2015, one person of the polyamory community, Luca Boschetto, starts to send around a Google Doc. So it's just an underground Google document going around the internet, which was called Italiano Inclusivo. And actually, I would say they had a proposal for a more inclusive use of Italian language, and they, as a non-binary pronoun, because Luca uses lei in Italian, el schwa I, which is like they. They suggested the use of the short schwa for the singular, this rotated I, yes, I say, and the long schwa for the plural, which looks a little bit like a 3, okay? I have never used the plural schwa because usually, as Italian needs to, how do you say, more element of the phrase are matched, you know, like pronouns and adjective and everything. You don't really need, from my point of view, a second new character to mark the plural because you understand it from the structure of the phrase. For example, le bambine è pregato di lavarsi le mani. E bambine sono pregate di lavarsi le mani. So it's the same sound, but from le and e and the verb, è pregate e sono pregate, you can understand if I'm dealing with a singular or a plural. So that's why I use only one symbol. Anyway, another important moment is in 2019. In 2019 came out one book I wrote, Femminili Singolari. And in one page, in roughly half page of this book, I will leave you the slides so you can then read all these documents, but I won't move further because I don't have time and I want to discuss live other issues. In half page, I discussed something that had happened to me. At the time, I was speaking out a lot in many places about the use of feminine, the feminine words in Italian and so on. And in one specific conference, I was in Prato, a non-binary person came up to me, and it was probably the first time I met a non-binary person, and this person told me, oh, everything you told us about the visibility of women in language and in society is very important. I second that, but I have another problem. I'm a non-binary person. And probably my expression was that of a not very intelligent cow looking at a train passing, because it was totally a new thing for me. 2019, I mean, I'm so ashamed about this. And so I asked them, what do you mean? And so they answered me, well, I don't identify neither as a male nor as a female, and so I don't know how to use Italian, how to express myself in Italian language. When I write, I use the asterisk, but when I speak, I don't know what to use. And without knowing all the history of all the previous history I have shared here with you, I just answered them, but out of my heart, why don't you use the schwa? Because the schwa is this undetermined sound, it's not a, e, I, o, u, it's a. So being this strange sound that sits in the middle of the quadrilatero, how do you say quadrilatero? It's not really a square, but this parallelepipedo, okay? The square of the vowels in Italian, they are like a, e, I, o, u, and the schwa sits in the middle. And so it being in the middle, it's like, a semantic representation of undefined gender. So for me, it was very cool, but it was just an idea, not really serious. And then in the next year, the same publisher house, FQ, decided to publish this very nice feminist pamphlet by Marcia Tiburi, translated from Brazilian Portuguese. I won't say that the name in Brazilian is Feminismo in Comune. In Italian it was translated like Il contrario della solitudine, manifesto per un femminismo in comune. And in that manifesto, the author, Marcia Tiburi, uses in a couple of instances feminismo para todas, todes, todos. Now this todes, todos in Portuguese, it's an inclusive form that is neither masculine nor feminine, and it's used, it's quite widely used in Spanish and in Portuguese. It's an experimental form. I mean, it's not something that is inside the official grammar of either Spanish or Portuguese, but it's widely used. I was last year in Uruguay, and at the National Library, there was this huge poster outside the National Library, and it was like a place for todes to read, okay? I don't remember the rest of the phrase, but basically instead of saying por todos or por todas, it said par todes, okay? So they were using very coolly this inclusive form. So when faced with the problem of translating this todes, the publisher house plus Eloisa Del Giudice, who is the translator of this book, decided to go for the schwa. And this is the debut of the schwa in Italian printed form, I mean on print, per tutte, tutte, tutti. The next and the last thing that happens that we see today happens on the 26th of July 2020. Mattia Feltri, which is a famous Italian journalist, writes a very short editorial on the first page of La Stampa. This is directly from the first page of the La Stampa, 26th of July 2020. Allarmi sian fasciste. I think you can guess that it's ironical, okay? It's a satirical piece. And it's all about, these stupid people that go around suggesting the use of the schwa. They talk about an academician of the Crusca. And you can read it afterwards. It's even cool if it was not such an important issue, which is dragged into the mud, basically. Now, the problem is that the person they do not nominate here, the academician of the Crusca, is actually me. Even if I have never been an academician of the Crusca, I worked at the Crusca for 20 years, but as a simple slave, just an aide, okay? So I never defined myself an academician of the Crusca. And at the time, I did not work already at the Crusca. I had moved away in 2019. Now, what happens here is that due to this small article, the Crusca gets angry, And they write an open letter to the director of La Stampa stating that they were very offended by the fact that an association was made between that person we do not nominate, which is me, and us. Okay, so basically what happened is the perfect storm. And I found myself in the middle of this storm because I have never pretended to have any kind of maternity of the Schwa, because I have not a maternity of the Schwa. I'm just the first person inside the context of the academia who has dealt with this issue, but really I'm not the mother of the Schwa, which sometimes I'm referred as. As the Crusca and La Stampa were fighting between each other, it became a sort of cultural war. Everybody had to add something to the discussion. The most interesting thing for me of this piece of journalism is that at the time, the printer which printed physically La Stampa did not have the character of the Schwa. So that same night they got this piece, they had frantically to look for it, to search for it. Maybe they had to buy this single character just to print it out. So in a way, it's still the debut of the Schwa. But maybe the tone of this piece makes you understand more why even today the discussion on the Schwa is so heated. Okay? There is a whole lot of story I tell usually, but I don't want to lose the few minutes I have. I just want to show you another thing. Yes, but I want to discuss with you more because it's more interesting. Okay, what is this? This is one of the cases in which we could have used in a translation the Schwa. This is a great book. I hope you have all read it. It's Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, 2019 Man Booker Prize, one of my favorite books. I met Evaristo last year, actually, and we had a great time together. Such a beautiful, wonderful person. And this is the exergo, how do you say, the dedication, the beginning of the book. You can see in the English version that Evaristo is, how do you say, is trying, making experiments with language, and she's using all these unconventional ways of expressing these four nouns, sister, woman, brother, and man. You can see it here. And of course, only the first forms are the standard: sisters, women, brothers, and men, but then many other things are mixed around, just to show, the singularity and the variety of human beings. And this is the version by Martina Testa, per le sorelle e le donne e I nostri fratelli e I nostri uomini e I membri LGBTQI più della famiglia umana. So all the messing around with language by Evaristo is disappeared, okay? And this is only the dedication. Now, I want to state here in public that Martina Testa is one of the greatest translators we have. I mean, she's really excellent. I have some questions about her choice of, moving away from complexity, basically, just jumping over complexity. But let's roll to the next page. Okay. This is the introduction. There is one character of the 12 characters narrated in the book Girl, Woman, Other that comes out at one point as a non-binary person. So being non-binary is a very important part of the narrative of chapter 4. This person is called Megan in the beginning, and as you can read here, she wonders about how to come out. She says, Megan wondered aloud how she could put her gender-free identity into practice when they were living in a gender-binary world, and that with so many definitions, sane and insane, she refrained from saying, the very idea of gender might eventually lose any meaning. Who can remember them all? Maybe that was the point, a completely gender-free world, or was it a naive utopian dream, and so on. So you see, she is thinking about how to move from theory to the practice of being non-binary. And what happens here? Now, this is the original and the translation. Megan said maybe she should become a missionary of the gender non-conforming crusade, going forth to spread the gospel that gender is one of the biggest lies of our civilization. Translation, for now we are on the feminine side. Megan disse che forse sarebbe dovuta diventare una missionaria del non conformismo di genere, armare una sua crociata e annunciare al mondo che il concetto di genere è una delle più grosse menzogne della nostra civiltà. Excellent translation. Again, you can already spot the importance of the question of non-binarism here. Okay, and here we are in the core, okay? They discussed the best gender-neutral alternatives, such as a, per, they, and tested each word to see if the words tripped off the tongue or tripped over it, ditto with the alternatives to his and hers, blah, blah, blah. Parlarono di quali fossero le migliori alternative per indicare con un pronome la neutralità di genere, tipo, and then Testa does not translate these, okay? So A, E, they stay the same, e testarono ogni parola per vedere se una frase scorreva bene o ci si inceppava a dirla, idem per le alternative a his e hers. At this point, we need to know both languages to understand what is going on. But this is a choice that I could even accept, because Italian is not that varied on the pronoun side. And here we get to the translation. I have highlighted, thanks to Gigliola Sulis, I have worked with her on this, the places where the they is used in English. So at this point, they became Morgan. Morgan, no longer Megan, has self-identified as gender-free for 6 years now. They've learned to be cool with it when people don't use or understand their preferred pronouns. Morgan, non più Megan, ormai si identifica come gender-free da 6 anni, ha imparato a non prendersela quando gli altri non usano o non capiscono i pronomi con cui ha scelto di definirsi. As you can see, what happens here? It could be a place to use a direct translation of the they pronoun, such as lei, el, schwa, i. Instead, Testa works around the issue, and she simply tries to use, in every case, forms that do not convey gender mark. Si appoggia coi gomiti, si liscia e si lucida il cranio, actually quite a genius here, okay? And then she, she expresses every time the name of the person, Morgan, instead of saying they. For example, here, Morgan's relieved to have escaped the schmoozing egotarians of London cliques. A couple of them had been forced to say hello when they stood in their fight path. Per Morgan è stato un sollievo sfuggire alle chiacchiere degli egomostri delle cricche londinesi. Un paio di persone le ha dovute salutare quando se le ha trovate davanti sulla via di fuga. You see, again, she worked around the question. Morgan had escaped outside. Morgan ha trovato scampo di fuori. Guarda, you see, and here Morgan is stated more times instead of the they. So I'm showing you this just to show you that in this case, a more, conventional approach has been taken to translate the singular they. Martina Testa decided to play it on the safe side, I would say, without using a possible experimental form in the translation. So I showed you a translation in which the schwa was used, okay, to mirror the todes, and one translation, much more important, of a bigger book, of course, it came out for Sur, it was published by Sur, that decided to jump over the issue. I personally, if I had translated this, I would have been delighted to experiment in this text, because it's a highly experimental book in which the non-binarism is very important in this chapter. So I just showed you 2 examples. Nowadays, more examples of translation with the schwa are coming out. For example, there is a series of sci-fi books called The Murderbot Diaries, by Martha, I don't remember the name now. Anyway, The Murderbot Diaries. It's about a murder bot. In the English version, the murder bot is referred to as it, because it's in the beginning it's a machine. Well, and then you find out quite quickly that actually it's more a human being than a machine, so they move over to she. And in the Italian version, in the beginning, they use the schwa. And this is a case in which I would not have used the schwa, because the schwa is not the correct translation for the it. It's the correct translation for the they, for the singular they. But some things are moving around. Of course, the problem with the schwa is that for now, it's not completely understandable by everybody, and it moves the attention of the persons away from the rest of the text, for example. So everybody concentrate on the schwa and tend not to consider all the rest we are talking about. So that's why even I use it very seldom, because it's a distractor. It's a weapon of mass distraction, I would say. A cool one. If you want to know more about these issues, I have recently written an essay in English. It has been hell for me. I'm not good in writing in English. And it's inside this book called Inclusiveness Beyond the Non-Binary in Romance Languages, Research and Classroom Implementation by Glaucia Silva and Cristiane Soares. It just came out, actually. It's a few weeks old. The PDF version is affordable. The hardcover is not. But sorry. Yeah, okay, yes. But of course, if you need any more information, you can write to me, okay? Wink, wink. And I can give you some more material, because I have a lot of material on this issue. And now, if we can, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Let me start with a technical question. Did you get a chance to ask Martina Teste about it? Because I have the feeling that it was the publisher, not her, pushing her in one direction, right?
Actually, I had a quite heated discussion with Martina in public 2 years ago at the Salone del Libro di Torino, the Turin Salon of the Book, how do you say, the book fair.
The book fair.
And I was surprised that she was a bit on the fence. And what happened is that she said, well, basically it's something that is such a small issue that I was not interested in you know, dealing with it.
Oh, okay.
And then something highly strange happened for me. I mean, she asked the audience, well, even here, how many non-binary persons are in the room? And of course, you cannot pretend that people come out like this.
But that's not the point.
And by the way, that's not the point. It's like saying, okay, we have this illness that, you know, that touches only a very small percentage of the population, so we just don't deal with it. So, I don't know, it was a strange answer, but maybe she felt that she was a bit cornered, and I didn't want to corner her, but maybe it was a panel with other 4 persons that were into these gender issues, so maybe she felt a little bit out of her league. Okay. But she was defending her choice. And from a translator's point of view, I can see that it's a choice that gives a lot of transparency to the text, so it's more understandable. But if you have read Evaristo, Evaristo is an experimental text. So it's not just a novel. For me, it's a masterpiece, but for example, it does, as you have seen from the example, it doesn't have punctuation. So it's already very experimental. That's why I still think that it would have been the perfect place to go and try something new.
I had the feeling that she somehow tried to domesticate the test. So why did, I mean, I'm wondering why embracing something that's very experimental. She has been a very active, very famous translator in Italy, very active. So I'm wondering, you know, we don't care about Martina Teste, obviously, but it's interesting to say that there's this tendency to normalize things, right? To domesticate even more, because the whole point of that book is that language.
It's not normal. It's not being normal.
Exactly,
the whole point
in
of
the
the
sense,
book.
you know, and it's investigating, you know, identity and things like that. So I'm just interesting. All right, would you like to tell us a bit more? You mentioned that at the very beginning, this difference between genderless and neutral.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit on that if you feel like?
Yes,
or talk about something else.
Okay, when we think about neutral, especially those who have studied ancient languages, so Latin or Greek, you might think of a third gender. So, because this is how we learned about it in Latin or in Greek. So we have masculine, feminine, and neutral. In this case, the issue is not having a third gender, but the issue is that many languages are missing a way, as Deutscher said, of not expressing gender, which is different from saying we need a third gender. okay? Because non-binary or gender fluid, gender queer, two-spirit persons are not neutral at all. They just fall outside the gender binary. So basically, for me, the thing is, if I think about neutral, I think about 3 grammatical genders on the same level: masculine, feminine, and neutral. When I think about a non-gendered form, I think the situation is a little bit different. I have a non-gendered form, and then if I want, I can express the gender. Exactly like in English, I can say spokesperson, or I can say spokesman or spokeswoman. But I can also stay here and say spokesperson. That's why I prefer talking about genderless and not neutral, because that forces all the immense variety of human beings into a 1/3 category. And it's not the case, because the genders are many more than just 2 and then something else.
So, I mean, the name of this conference, the subtitle is Gender Translation and Activism. So you're extremely, as I said before, very prolific writer, but also very active on social media. So you are indeed an activist, and you also got in trouble for that, right? Some people accusing you of just do your job, being a linguist, and don't mess up. And we know, once again, I've been saying that yesterday, I keep repeating this, obviously, as before, the political weight of words, why we decide to use one term instead of another is deeply political, as every choice we do. So I'm wondering also, this, you're embracing, social media, using how you use them, and what has happened, how has this changed your relationship with language? Because clearly there is, to write means to have time, to be, in a sense, slow, while social media, it's all about being fast and, so completely different physical relationship with language. So can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I'm kind of very lucky, because social media are not a new thing for me. Actually, I entered the realm of cyberspace in very old times, in 1995. So I have been online for an awful long time. And at the time, I didn't want to study linguistics. I went for engineering, because my father is a linguist, and I just didn't want to have anything to do with my father's career, okay? So I went to engineering. And I moved from engineering to linguistics, to say lettere, after 1.5 years of agony, giving only one exam, programmation, so programming, computer programming, and failing 9 times the big first maths exam, Analisi 1. But it taught me a lot, also about failure, but that's another conference. But one good thing that left me engineering is that I could beg my parents. I was 20 at the time. I could beg my parents to buy me a personal computer, which was still a rarity at the time. I mean, my father had one in the office, but having one at home, that was a completely different thing. And plus, at that point, I was identified quite as a nerd and a geek. So a guy that would have loved to date me, instead of giving me flowers or chocolate, gifted me an internet connection. What a very romantic gift. Of course, the dating did not go through, but yeah, I was busy going online. But it was my first encounter with the virtual communities. And I stayed there. I have been staying there for the last 9 years at this point. And so it's not that I moved to social media. It's more that social media came to me at one point, because I have always been speaking out loud online. I loved the fact that it's easier to get to a public on social media instead that what happens on TV or newspapers. You have to have connection, social and cultural and political connections, whereas on social media you can, until a certain point, speak out loud, and in non-filtered mode. So it has been quite organic for me to be online. Of course, what has changed a lot in the last years is that my audience grew very much. So currently, I'm a micro-influencer, but I have around 85,000 followers on Instagram. and roughly 70,000 on Facebook, plus the 5,000 friends, false friends. It's not really friends. That's why friends in brackets. And so, yeah, I have a small army of persons who listen to me. And this means that even when I would just love to chill and to speak about the weather, it becomes a political issue because I am speaking about it. I'm quite loudly, I have a political position which is quite clearly expressed. So it's not that I can pass for a right-wing sympathy, how do you say, with having some sympathies with the current government. That's out of question.
Il Presidente Giorgia is not your fan.
No.
That we got. Again, another aspect that here we are talking about gender, but I want to kind of move again on the weight of words. Recently, I read somewhere, I forgot who wrote it, this idea that we have been talking about a lot about resilience, and we should go back and talk about resistance, because, you know, like, it's interesting how certain words get overused all of a sudden because they become fashionable in a way and they kind of lose the original meaning, change form, and that's fine, because obviously the language is alive, is a creature, it's not like frozen in amber, so it should actually go on. But on the other hand, we also always have to be careful. I'm saying that because I have similar, I wrote a book with Antonella Nedda, Poesia come ossigeno, per un'ecologia della parola. As poets, we're just interrogating ourselves on how we use language and how we have to be careful and on the political issues. So this idea of going back to resistance, I don't know if you have any thought on this, how certain words at times, you know, get somehow altered from overuse or no? Yes?
Well, I have actually a lot of thoughts about this because, first of all, resilience strikes an open nerve, as you might know. In Italy, resilienza is one of the words that gives, makes the audience cringe. Okay, so it's really hated, and it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting, actually, that when resilienza was already washed out, overused, considered irritant, as, for example, attimino, okay, it became part of this very important acronym that is now used in politics, the PNRR, Piano Nazionale di Resistenza e Resilienza, which for me is a symbol of how much politics is out of sync, actually, with what happens in society, because they picked up a really hated word. Ornella Castellani Pollidori, an academician of the Crusca, in the 19th used to write about the plastification of language, when words become plastic. Like, you know, they were in amber, but even worse, they were in plexiglass, I would say, and they don't breathe anymore, and they become, how do you say, they lose genuinity. And so we should avoid this effect on words by caring a lot more for them and not using them everywhere. For example, now the big problem for me is with inclusione, inclusion. Which is a word that I came to not like, I would say. Not hate, but because inclusion and inclusivity, and inclusive language, how do you say, ribadisce, come si dice? Restate that there is somebody who has the force of including and others that sort of have to bear the inclusion, but they cannot really choose how to be included, okay? So, for example, Fabrizio Acanfora, who is a person who's a scholar of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, prefers to use convivenza, coexistence, instead of inclusion, and I use ample language or wide language, linguaggio ampio, instead of linguaggio inclusivo. So for me, inclusività, inclusivo is the new resilienza, and became a plastificated word which I tend to avoid.
Hi, thank you very much. I would like to ask you, how do you understand the notion of human being concerning the difference between gender neutral and gender free? Do you understand the notion of human being as a gender neutral or a completely gender free notion?
Well, that's a good question.
I will ask you, how would you translate it into Italian? Because as a translator, I had a big challenge
Uh-huh.
in trying to translating this notion in a very peculiar text where the author defined herself as a woman with a lot of masculinity inside, who hadn't found the right language to define herself yet.
Okay.
So when she, or they define as a human being, we really didn't have to translate that word. We wondered if it was could have been the case of using a schwa or not.
Umana.
Essere umana. Yes.
Well, you know, essere umano, like persona or soggetto or individuo, actually fall in the category of the promiscuous names. So essere umano is technically masculine, grammatically masculine, but semantically is perceived as without a gender or, you know, omnicomprehensive. And I am an essere umano. Everybody here is an essere umano, okay? So I would personally, I mean, my first answer as a translator would be I would just use essere umano, human being. But if the author is experimenting, I mean, it's more experimental as a text, and she says that she's looking for her personality, we could also play with Italian language and write umane, without essere, umane. Just, io sono un umano, like that. I would have suggested this maybe, without the essere at this point.
So someone on the Zoom says, first off, thank you for the great talk. I have a question related to the perception and potential use of the schwa as a quote-unquote regional sound in Italian.
Yeah.
I.e., the schwa is a sound very typical in Southern Italian dialects. How much is the resistance to the schwa also tied to the de facto racist devaluation of Southern dialects in normative Italian?
A lot. The short answer is a lot. Now, I have omitted the second part of the story of the schwa because I didn't want to go over time. But actually, in 2020, I don't remember at this point, 21 maybe, there was a petition against the schwa that was published and shared on change.org. And it was written by a professor of linguistics of the University of Cagliari named Massimo Arcangeli. And actually, in the last, you can Google it up, and you will find it also in my slides, which I leave here. In the last part of this petition, in which he says that this is dangerous because it goes against tradition, blah, blah, and everything like that. Well, you can read it up. But the main point is, at the end, he says, and plus, the problem is that at that point, the whole peninsula of Italy would sound like a mix of Campanian, Apulian, and other southern dialects. And so what I can understand from this way of reasoning is that would be a problem. If we all sound like Neapolitans, that would be a problem. Why would that be a problem? If we all sound like from Milan, that is not a problem because being from Milan is cool, but being from Naples is uncool. So yes, we have to keep in mind that in Italy there is still a lot of so-called anti-meridionalism, so against the southern, how to say, a feel of racism against the southerners of Italy. And for me, it was quite shocking that such a thing could be said and used, you know, as a way of going against the schwa by a professor of linguistics. Yeah, but he's not from Sardinia. He only teaches in Sardinia. Well, I mean, is that really a problem? For me, it's not such a problem. Yeah. I mean, it's about the well-being of a part of our society against how we sound. But, you know, in Italy, people are still saying that ministra is cacophonic, is ugly, sounds ugly. And when they say me this, I would answer, well, for me, a cacophonic word is transustanziazione. Okay, but nobody goes up to the priest to say, oh, please don't use transustanziazione because it's so cacophonic. So what is really, you are a poet, so you know about this. I mean, for a poem, it might be relevant to find words that sound good to my ear, but then when I speak every day, I do not really choose words because they sound cool. I just use what I need to use.
Particularly, I'm often asked, you rather be called poeta or
Poetessa, yes.
It's a thing, and I said, la poeta. I like la poeta.
Yes.
Because poeta,
I think you are switched off, but... Yeah, but no, but maybe online. Anyway, she was saying, many people ask her if she wants to be called la poetessa or la poeta. Now, tradition says, I have studied la poetessa. Ada Negri was a poetessa, for example. But the use of the feminine forms in essa is considered unnecessary, I would say. So you don't really have to deform so much the word, adding this suffix, this essa suffix, which is really... I have a mental image of essa. I'm sorry, this is a little bit, I don't know if I can say, but I always say it anyway. I always think about it as one of the women of Federico Fellini. Poetessa, okay? With a lot of breast. It looks like a two breasts, by the way, no? Poetessa. So if you cannot use the suffix essa, which in past times was used either to mock the presence of women, deputatessa were called the first female deputate in the parliament, or for the wives of the men. So, for example, presidentessa as the wife of the president, sindachessa as the wife of the sindaco. So we can avoid the use of the feminine forms in essa, and poeta is exactly like atleta. La poeta, l'atleta, l'esteta, whatever. So la poeta.
Before, thanks for your talk.
Thank you.
Speaking about the schwa, do you think that we have to add the suffix to a list of masculine and feminine, or do you think to the schwa as an inclusive, a kind of a container of all the grammatical gender? Because from my point of view, I like your final conclusion about the convivence of the differences. So I know that there is a risk. I mean, the risk of the list. Of the listing.
Yes. Yes.
But from from a semantic point of view, I would prefer to have this kind of wide ventaglio
Yes.
of gender, of grammatical gender, than just one.
Yeah, well,
Because there is the risk to plastify.
yeah, well, it's always there.
To banalize, to plastify the word.
It's always, the risk is always there. I just think that we need more an ungendered container than a third gender. Because the real issue is here, how can I express the non-presence of masculine and feminine gender? So for me, it's different. It's not a third gender. Sorry? Yes, it's in a hierarchical, yes, it's over masculine and feminine. But of course, one of the risks that I'm told all the time about is that we re-invisibilize the feminine gender. And, well, I don't think that's the case because, for example, I use the feminine nouns a lot. I mean, when I need to refer to a woman. But I also know that in some cases it would be very comfortable from a linguistic point of view to have a non-gendered way of speaking. For example, when I speak about somebody I do not the gender about, gender of, sorry. And the only other situation in which this could be a problem is then when I refer to a mixed audience, and I do not say anymore signore, signori, what I might say signore, but I have another issue here myself. The schwa is highly experimental. Most people do not have a clue about it. I mean, here we are in an echo chamber, so maybe we don't feel that it's so strange, but in fact, outside our small world, It's something that is unknown yet, uncharted territory. So if I go in a public event and I say buonasera a tutte, they might not understand me. So usually I use workarounds in these cases, and I might say buonasera alle persone presenti, or buonasera a chi è in sala. And so I jumped over the issue. And usually when I write and I have the time to think about workarounds, I use them most of the time. There is an article, I will share with you, a small bibliography, that came out on a rivista called Circula. And it's 12 pages of text. And I've never used the schwa, but I never used the overextended masculine as well. And I just used workarounds all the time. For example, chi lavora in questa azienda, and things like that. And the cool thing is that you don't understand it until the end when I state it. And I say, as you can see, I only used one schwa when referring to a non-binary person, a non-binary actor, Mason Alexander Park. But in all the other cases, I used semantically neutral forms or undetermined forms, persona, individuo, essere umano, and so on, and you probably did not even note it. But your brain probably has reacted differently to that writing instead of the use of overextended masculine. And if you want to read more about the effects of overextended masculine on our brains, I suggest you to Google up Pascal Gygax. Pascal, Gygax. He teaches at the Freiburg University in Switzerland. And he has written many things because he has experimented empirically on the effects of overextended masculine on our brains. And there is also one book in French, if you read French, which is called, I don't remember. In translation is, does our brain think with the masculine? Le cerveau pense au masculin, something like that. It's a Gallimard, I think, as an edit publishing house. Very nice book. I only read French. Lucky for you, I don't speak French, but I read the book, and it's really illuminating for all those of you who might think, well, you know, it's a minor issue. But the experiments he makes with overextended masculine are really, really very interesting.
Jennifer, more questions? Yeah? All right. Well, then, thank you, Vera.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.